Hello, everybody, and welcome to an ETOD-for-All, so an equitable transit-oriented development for all, for every community, for every 77, for all abilities, and for all people. We are here to celebrate that today. My name is Leslie Honore. I am the CEO of Urban Gateways and the proud co-chair of Elevated Chicago.
Good afternoon, everybody. Come on, talk back to us now. We're going to be here all day.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, that's better. All right. So listen, my name is Kevin Sutton. I am the co-chair of Elevated Chicago, and I am the retired former executive director of Foundation for Home and Square. So I've been around this for a while, and we just want to thank you all for coming out. Give yourselves a hand for giving up your afternoon. I know, you drive past the lake and the beach to get here, and it's like, whoa, I could have made a turn. So we're happy to have you here today.
We wanted to welcome you, give some housekeeping, invite you into the space before we welcome up our executive director, Juan Sebastian. So first, can you make sure your phones are silenced? I'll give you a moment to do that. Turn those ringers down.
We won't ask you to turn them off. We know that.
So after you've silenced your phones, please try to keep our aisles clear as people will be coming in and out, wanting to be able to move around safely, and it's a fire hazard. We don't want those type of hazards at all. There are bathrooms that are located immediately outside the main doors. There are also 2 porta potties if the line is long, and if you are like me, you will just be waiting for the bathroom to open up before you go to the porta potty.
And all these gorgeous plants are already spoken for, so please don't walk off with them. I know it's very tempting, but that's my job to steal the plants, not yours. So let's see, what are we doing here? Oh, our community board. So we have this wonderful community board to my right, and we would love for you to use that in between sessions or the panels. There's chalk, and you can put pictures on it. There's all sorts of things, but we'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to just have you add to our community wall. So if you do that, that would be awesome. So without further ado, why don't we bring up our wonderful leader, Juan Sebastian, the executive director of Elevated Chicago.
All right, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Okay, that's a good energy. Buenas tardes. As you all maybe heard, or maybe you know me, I see some familiar faces, but my name is Juan Sebastian Arias. I'm the executive director with Elevated Chicago. And on behalf of Elevated Chicago, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We know that there's a lot of challenges facing our communities right now. We know there are a lot of threats and a lot of attacks that are happening. And you all still showed up. And we appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon to be here in community and to be here with us. We see you and we appreciate you. Now, we intentionally designed this year's ETOD-for-All to be open, inclusive, and accessible. And we wanted to create not only a space for thoughtful and inspirational conversation, but also a space for joy and for connection, because we know that joy is a form of resistance too. Today is an opportunity to learn about what it takes to make equitable transit-oriented development happen, from housing and community development projects, to transit funding and needed reforms, to community-driven planning and policy making. But today is also an opportunity to eat together, to dance together, to enjoy our time together, and to be reminded of the reasons why we work so hard to strengthen and to protect our communities. So today, this event is our offering to our city. It's our offering to you, all of our partners, our neighbors, our friends, and our colleagues. And especially again, with so many of the challenges that we're facing, we hope today is really a chance for you all to connect with others who share our same values of equity, community, and ETOD. So my challenge and my invitation for all of you today is to meet somebody new, to have a conversation, share your email, your phone number, or don't share any contact information if you're not comfortable. Share your ideas, share what you like about your neighborhood, share what you want to see in your, what you like in your neighborhood, share what you want in your neighborhood too. Share why transit is important and essential for you. But really our goal is, our hope is that you all can have this moment to also build connections. Because we know that our resilience as a city and as a region really comes from our connections. So I also want to take a moment to reaffirm Elevated Chicago's commitment to the E in ETOD, and that's equity. Our latest strategic plan is grounded in equity. It's focused on how we can make sure that policies, funding, and planning processes center the voices of communities that have been left out of them for so long. We know that transit-oriented development is only truly successful when it delivers real benefits to the people who live, work, and raise their families in our neighborhoods while we protect against their displacement. That commitment is what guides us, and it's the thread running through every panel and every activation today. So, okay, I'm almost done. Are we almost ready? Are you ready to get the afternoon going?
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we dive in, just a couple logistics too. So our panel discussions are about to start right here in a minute or less, and they're gonna run through 5 o'clock. Each panel brings together voices and leaders from different sectors, from community groups, from developers, practitioners, policymakers. And each panel is designed to share lessons learned and visions for more equitable neighborhoods connected to transit. So that's 1:30 to 5. Starting at 3, we're gonna have outdoor activities outside that are gonna run until 6:30. That's the fest that you see already set up, waiting to be activated. They're bringing to life this year's theme, which is the 15-minute neighborhood. After 3 p.m., outside, you'll find music, we'll have a DJ, you'll find food, tacos, grilled cheese, ice cream. You'll find games, activities, information tables, ways to get involved in transit advocacy. You'll find a lot of stuff. And we hope that you'll not only learn from those activations, but also have fun exploring, walking around, and really just feeling what a equitable, walkable neighborhood feels like. Last note is that space is limited for both panels and for outside, so just plan ahead and make the best out of the day that you want. And once again, just thank you for being here. It's a beautiful day. I can't really believe that we have almost 80-degree day in late September, but here we are, for better or for worse. And thank you for believing, for coming today. Thank you for believing in the power of equity and connection, and for choosing to spend this afternoon with us. Together, we can dream and we can build the neighborhoods that we know we deserve. So thank you, and thank you. And let's get this started. So I'm gonna pass the mic over to our moderator of our first panel, Emily.
Thank you. Hey everyone, my name is Emily from the Center for Neighborhood Technology. And before we go any further, I just want to shout out the RUD Resources team who's pulled this whole event together and done an incredible job. So thank you, team. We're here to talk about Elevated Works Technical Assistance Program, and really specifically how technical assistance, pre-development dollars, and good policy support ETOD across the city of Chicago. And it really is my pleasure and honor to have these panelists with me today. Kate Ansorge is the VP of Real Estate Solutions at IFF. OG Eggleston at the end is the Executive Director of the Renaissance Collaborative, and Dawveed Scully is the Managing Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Planning and Development at the City of Chicago. I'm going to introduce Elevated Works as a program to you all, give you a little bit of background about what that is. We'll do some Q&A with our panelists, and then we're going to turn it over to you to ask questions that you have. So as we're talking, think about some questions, and then we'll pass the mic around in a little bit. It really feels like we're in a room with friends. It's really fun to see lots of old familiar faces, and welcome to those who are new. Elevated Works launched in 2022 in partnership with the City of Chicago and funding from the Chicago Community Trust and the MacArthur Foundation. And it was really built on this acknowledgement that for equitable transit-oriented development to happen, we needed to have three things. We needed to have pre-development dollars to support ideas in our neighborhood. We needed technical assistance to support developers where this might be their first time ever developing, but they saw a need in their community and they wanted to make it happen. And we needed good policy from the city to make sure that the underlying zoning and regulations and permitting process was supportive to this kind of development that we wanted to do. The program has four main goals. We wanted to support emerging small developers building near transit. We wanted to help support their projects, move them forward, see barriers and help them address them through real estate coaching, connection with experts, and peer learning. We wanted to build a community of ETOD developers that learned from each other and supported each other. We wanted to learn from these barriers. We wanted to identify what common barriers existed among ETOD developers and then apply those learnings to other projects or scale them up to systems level change. So we could just get rid of the barriers in the first place. And then fourth, we wanted to tell the story. We wanted to tell the story of these amazing projects and how ETOD makes an impact in our communities. So with that, I'm going to kick off the panel by passing the mic to OG to do an introduction of yourself, the ETOD project you're working on, and how you've interacted with the Elevated Works program.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is OG Eggleston. Once again, I'm the Executive Director of the Renaissance Collaborative. Our organization is housed at the historic former Wabash YMCA, 3757 South Wabash. Fun fact, it's the birthplace of African-American history. So it's a very historic building. We are a developer as a nonprofit. We developed that building, brought it back to use in the Bronzeville community. It's a 101 unit single room occupancy building. And we also provide wraparound services through staffing, full-time staffing for the residents that are in the building, which is paraphrasing our mission, moving residents to self-sufficiency. It's one thing to have a roof over your head, but it's another thing to move you to that self-sufficiency. In addition to that, located on 5300 South Calumet, we have Senior Village 1, which is our aging adult facility, which is a 71 unit, one bedroom building brought into use 10 years ago. And we also have full-time staff to provide wraparound services for our residents to allow them to age gracefully in place. The third development that we're currently working on, Abrams Intergenerational Village, is named after our former and founding executive director, Pat Abrams. It will be a 71 unit intergenerational building, which is our ETOD-funded building. And it's once again 71 units where it will provide housing for grandparents to provide living support for their grandchildren or younger dependents in their home. A very unique model to Chicago. And why Elevated Works was so important for us is the technical assistance that it brought to the table. When I started with the organization, the former executive director worked alongside me for the first year, allowing me to learn more about the organization, learn more about development. And the first technical assistance project that I worked on was with Rudd Resources, who's taking care of us today. And it was crucial for us because it allowed us to develop a branding strategy for Abrams Intergenerational Village. That branding strategy was very important because when you're in nonprofit work or work in general, you have your head down and you tend to not tell your story. And we were tired of being a best kept secret. Mm-hmm. So we wanted the city of Chicago, the country, and ultimately the world to know the great work that we're doing for our community. That's one benefit. The second benefit for us, or specifically for me being a new executive director, was the questioning and the deep dive that Rudd Resources brought to our organization, the various questions that they asked. Why are you doing this? Why is this important for the community? How do you want to tell the story of the organization? This was crucial for me because, as everyone knows, you don't know what you don't know. And so by having those questions asked of me, it allowed me to recognize where there were some gaps and some areas that I needed to learn as a new executive director. And so it was a two-pronged benefit for us. And additional benefits of the TA is the individuals that you learn through the process of working through that technical assistance, the relationships that you developed when you go through that TA process and you start seeing the actual product of your work. That's very important too. It allowed me to bring in staff to be a part of that process, which serves as a learning opportunity for them as well. And it empowered them as my staff to now take the lead on various projects. So the technical assistance was more than just the individual technical assistance. It was more than just the organizational executive technical assistance. It was just an overall benefit to our organization.
I'm going to turn it over to Kate now at IFF. IFF was one of the main planning partners for Elevated Works from the very beginning and helped us think about how we wanted to create this program. So Kate, if you could introduce yourself and then talk a little bit more about IFF's role in Elevated Works.
Thank you. So IFF is a nonprofit that works to support community development with capital and real estate coaching and project management. I think one thing that's important about IFF is just like understanding that as we lend into deals, the sources of capital, but also the challenges that organizations have in being able to access that capital, and what that means in terms of the real estate project as well. So with Elevated Works, like one of the things I think is important is that we looked at this as a comprehensive collection of projects. We talk about it as a pipeline. In some ways, it's just like, a spreadsheet and a collection of projects, but it's really thinking instead about like, instead of this being one individual childcare center, one individual coffee shop, one individual affordable housing deal, that these are a collection of organizations that are pursuing sometimes the same capital, feeling like they're competing against scarce resources and trying to flip it and really be like, collectively, we want to see all of these projects be successful. And what would it take for us as a community, as a city, to fund all of these deals, because we think that they're all important to happen. And so we flipped it into really thinking about the aggregate of this and saying, instead of just thinking about trying to find $100,000 or $1 million for one deal, we're trying to find the capital for all of these. It also was a way to think about collective impact, right? What would be the impact of all of these resources being in our communities across the city, and the outcome of it, and being able to go to funders and saying, this is a big, ambitious goal, but we think it's really important. And so then organizations are accessing their own story, but really thinking about participating in a community and what the stories of the other organizations that might be catalytic to their projects. We also really do one-on-one coaching and check-ins. One of the goals of this is to meet people at the beginning of a project, meet them where they are, understand what their challenges are, and work with them to build a relationship before they potentially encounter a hurdle. A lot of times, technical assistance is offered to someone when they're stuck with something. It's really hard to build a relationship with someone when they're already frustrated with something that might be happening within a system. It might be a financial system, it might be a government system pursuing a grant. And so instead, we're like, let's meet you at the beginning of the project and build trust, understand what your ambitious goal is, and then think about how we can resource you. We're excited that we worked with 17 TA providers. I just think about the breadth and depth of the TA that we're offering. So OG talked about communications resources and storytelling and narrative. This is really powerful to unlock capital. Many funders want to fund deals, but if an organization can't effectively tell the story of why capital is important for it, they might miss out on capital for projects. We also had organizations that were pursuing zoning changes, and they needed to understand technical, what would they need to pursue from the city's perspective to be able to get this approved? Do they have the existing parking? So it's very specific and detailed technical information that might be hard for that organization to find on their own. And so being able to access this kind of group of 17 different organizations, each one of them have specific expertise that they can bring to it, and then for a project be able to really think collectively about it. We also do a lot of peer learning, right? So it goes back to this idea of a pipeline, that instead of this being an individual who's sort of pushing through this one project and what the impact of that one project is, it's looking at the collection and seeing that we have a ton of expertise within the projects that were funded, and how do we help people, grow their voice to be able to speak about the expertise that they have. I think there was some really unique business models and some unique ways of engaging with community and being responsive, and people wanted to hear more about those. And so we held group events. We brought in some of the technical expertise, but we also gave the microphone a lot of times to the developers that were funded through this project to talk about what challenges they've had and what they were doing to get through those, and what they had learned from community and what they had learned about the business models to be successful in doing that.
Thank you. Dawveed, so between 2023 and 2024, the city of Chicago distributed about 30 ETOD grants to development projects and pre-development projects uniquely. And those projects included a whole range of things: grocery store, affordable housing, community spaces, theaters, and DPD alongside those grants funded a technical assistance program, Elevated Works, to support them. So turning back time from DPD's perspective, a very different time. Why did the city decide to invest in a technical assistance program, and why was it important to pair these grants along with technical assistance?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emily. So Dawveed Scully, I'm with the Department of Planning and Development. And one of the things that, at DPD, we have this sort of, multiple facets of the department. We focus on land use planning and sort of neighborhood planning. We also do grant writing and grant making. We're usually sort of the last money in to sort of help a project get over, kind of the gap. But also providing opportunities for, focusing developments, specifically on the south end and the west side, and understanding, the zoning ramifications of that. So we're working across a lot of different, sort of areas to really, with the overall goal of fostering economic development in the city of Chicago. So one of the things that was identified after, sort of years of grant making through NOF and, TIF grants and those sort of things, was just sort of where those grants were landing, as well as how to better support the corridors that did have interest, but, need a little extra push to get over the hump. That, and also understanding that most of the folks that are coming to us are business owners, particularly, especially for the smaller grants. Like, it's somebody that is a baker, or they're trying to run a grocery store, they want to do a community center, or something that may not necessarily be in their, technical wheelhouse. And we can only do so much as a department. We're, kind of working and continually striving to make our programs simpler and more streamlined, but also working to document those so that there's more clear and transparent methodology around, like, how do you acquire city-owned land? How do you go about applying for the grant? But even still, having that technical assistance component, especially as Kate mentioned, at the front end, before you really get into the process. And like you said, you've run into a lot of frustrated people who are like banging their head against the wall around zoning or around, sort of not really understanding the terms of the grant. All of our grants are typically reimbursements. So you have to expend funds and you have to actually get those reviews to actually get reimbursed. So understanding and building a structure around that so that you're able to kind of move forward takes a lot of work. So really investing in that became, sort of central to how we work. And it's an integral part of how we're moving development forward at all scales, from housing development to, small business, the bakery on the street.
So OG, I don't know if the banging your head against the wall is a feeling that maybe you have felt once or twice in your process. I want to turn it back over to you and just dive into your project a little bit deeper, and thinking about from ideation to where you are now. You have an idea. The project you're working on came from, you identifying a need in your community and, wanting to step in and make it happen. And over the course of your development process, along the way, what type of support would you have wanted? And in what ways has, a technical assistance program like Elevated Works or other types of technical assistance, how would that have supported your project to keep it moving forward? And also for you, making it an enjoyable experience. It doesn't have to be a frustrating experience.
Well, I will say for our development project, I have not run into one snag. If you develop, you know that is not the truth whatsoever. Once again, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work alongside the former executive director. So a lot of the technical assistance that I may have needed, being the sole executive director of the organization, I was able to get that from her tutelage, once again, Pat Abrams. She's not paying me to continuously mention her name. So one, funding. Everybody understands the need for funding, especially in this environment. So just opening up additional opportunities to learn about what funding is out there, I think is very important. Like he stated, there are a lot of reimbursed funding. And so having clarity on what that means can be very important. But lucky enough for us, because we were associated with ETOD and we received the ETOD grant during an ETOD tour, I had the opportunity, thanks to Juan Sebastian, introducing me to a funder from Weinberg Foundation that turned into a sizable grant for us. And it was such a great opportunity for us that the initial amount that they stated they would give us, they increased by the time they funded us, which is very unique. I would also say what's important is convening, but Elevated Chicago and Elevated Works, as well as through our ETOD support, provided convening similar to various events and various learning opportunities they provide. Exposure is very important for a nonprofit leader, and when you have these various development projects. But this panel is an opportunity for exposure for our organization and for others. So a lot of the things that I would have needed in the past, we've actually, as an organization, received through being associated with Elevated Works. One other thing that I would say in terms of what's needed is transitioning from closing a development to stepping into executing the development. You work so hard to get to the finish line of closing, lining up all your funding, that you want to take a deep breath, but now you have a 14 to 18 month project ahead of you, which is an entirely different learning experience for you. So I would say from the technical assistance side, preparing executives and their staff to move from closing to execution.
So Kate, you, from your perspective at IFF, you're looking at the whole pipeline of projects. So you're able to see across these 30 different projects where there might be common barriers and how we as a system can address them. So I'm curious from your perspective, what you've learned from your involvement in Elevated Works and what lessons you'll take from this experience.
Yeah, thanks. I think that one thing that we've been working with is really thinking about what a project is encountering and what's the cause of that and what a resource might be. And so for us, we've been thinking about specifically, is it a real estate challenge that has to do with the real estate timeline and process? Is it a capital challenge that has to do with potentially timing of money? They don't have cash today to pay for an architect to get to construction start, or they have an actual capital gap in the total project. And the last is their capacity, right? A lot of organizations that are doing this are stretched thin. We talked about they run a business, they run a nonprofit, they work in the community. And so the real estate project is a means to an end for them to serve the community with what they think they want to build for it. And so having the capacity to do the real estate project may not be their strength. I find that when we're really specific about what the challenge is, then we can meet that need and try and address it much more easily than when we just say, you're not ready, right? And so it's they're applying for a grant, they get denied, they don't really understand what it is that they'd have to fix in order to get the grant next time. And so one of the things through our technical assistance is really being specific about the real estate, the capital, and the capacity, and thinking about how we could resource them to be successful to move forward through that. The other thing is a system navigation. So, we put this together recognizing that technical assistance was a barrier, but I don't think that when we put this together, we fully understood how valuable what we call a system navigator is to be able to get through our systems. I think some people were thinking about DPD, and that's a system, but we're also talking about the banking system, the financial system. We're talking about communities and politics and power. We're talking about philanthropy and all of the different types of systems that people move through to be able to get these projects built for their communities. And having someone who can do these check-ins once a month with someone, understand what's going on. I hear a lot of stuff come up in those, and we're able to say, hey, there's a person you can talk to, right? Like there's people's bring powerful networks to it, and we're able to really leverage that from other peers. An example of this is we're working with a childcare center that was encountering a challenge where they didn't have enough land. They had to add more parking for their project. What they didn't realize is that recently the city had passed the Connected Communities Ordinance and allowed projects that were within half a mile of a train station to get a reduction in their parking. They didn't know this. And so we talked with them, and they were able to get the reduced parking requirement, and they didn't have to redesign their building, lose childcare slots, or try and buy land next door. And they were able to move through the process faster, but also save money because it would have been expensive to try and build those extra parking spaces. So this is something through a check-in call as you're talking to someone and you're like listening to like, well, what is it that you're stuck with? And they're like, well, we have to go back and redesign. And you're like, maybe you don't. And we're able to help them find a different way. Another example was an organization that was working with a lender that was from out of state, and they were encountering a challenge where the lender was kicking back the general construction contract and saying that the retention, which is like, how much money you hold back when you pay a general contractor. This is very, very like specific and nerdy details information. And I was like, well, actually the state of Illinois has a law that makes that illegal, that we have different retention policies in the state of Illinois, that we actually like give more to the general contractor than they do in other states. The lender didn't know this because they hadn't worked in Chicago before, and we were able to like pull legislation and show them the state of Illinois and be able to help them like move through their closing checklist. And I think kind of the last thing in lessons learned is like, I work with Elevated Chicago. They have a really like powerful policy arm of work that they're doing. I think of that a lot of times as like showing up in city council, right? We're talking about, ADUs and parking minimums and all those kinds of things. I've really paid a lot of attention to, other types of policy. And so that includes like the city making pre-development grants. The city of Chicago didn't award pre-development grant funding. It's really powerful to unlock organizations who don't have cash to be able to get to construction start. And for me, that's a policy change. Being able to award those grants to organizations was really impactful in community development. And so really thinking about those, I think another one is the timing of money, right? The city is working to try and distribute more of the money at milestones instead of completely at the end of construction. This affects organizations who don't have a bunch of cash sitting in a bank to pay a general contractor and get to being able to unlock those funds at the end. And so Elevated Chicago has been working to really identify some of those other types of policy changes that would be impactful in community development. And so I think that's a great lesson learned, is how we can think about more of those types of policy changes, working through Cut the Tape and through other forums to be able to make change happen.
Thanks. So I'm going to toss a question to all three of you. Because this program, when we started it, we weren't really driven by trying to reach for big numbers. We weren't trying to get, thousands and thousands of units of affordable housing built. The projects that we're working with here are generally smaller square footage, but the impact of these projects in their neighborhood is profound. A lot of times the developers we're working with are like OG, developers who have been working in their neighborhood for a long time. A lot of them like born and raised their kids there, have like deep legacy in the neighborhoods, and are building something because they know there's a big impact on their communities. So I'm going to toss the question to all three of you in a second to talk about what you see has been a really meaningful impact of this program and the projects that we've supported. But I want to tell a quick story first, which is one impact that I think is really cool. When it comes to peer learning, one of the steering committee members of Elevated Chicago on a call once said, the history of Chicago, development in some neighborhoods here has been historically very extractive. And so for a program that's building community, where developers are actually collaborating with each other and trusting each other, is actually a very powerful act of resistance. And I thought that was really powerful. And one example, we worked with two projects in Rogers Park. One's a food co-op grocery store called Wild Onion, and another Ignatian Mission Center is close by. They met each other through our program, and Wild Onion at one point had their freezers break, and they had a bunch of food there that was going to go to waste, and they decided to call up Ignatian Mission Center and donate all of the food to their food pantry before it spoiled. And like that kind of small connection, we're not exactly counting in our impact report, but it's those types of connections that I think are building a stronger city. So I'm going to toss it to whoever wants to jump in first about what you think is the story of the impact that we're having in our neighborhoods through this program.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think, just in my role, I get to see a little bit of everything that's happening all over the city. And I think one of the things is, someone who grew up here on the South Side and live in Woodlawn, I grew up in South Shore, is that there's so many areas of the city that just haven't seen investment. They haven't seen development at all. So even though it may be a small project, it may be a gym or a, storefront coffee shop or something that, most people may not feel like, oh, well, that's not that big of a deal. A lot of times it is. It's the first thing that's happened, first sit-down restaurant in 50 years in a neighborhood, or it's the first, new business that's come that is owned by somebody locally. So having that impact, both I think shifts the narrative and changes the trajectory of a corridor and allows for people to both envision businesses that they may be thinking about in their neighborhood, as well as have a pathway forward. So I'll tell you one story. We had a sit down with many of the folks on 75th Street in the 6th Ward. And the meeting was held by the 6th Ward and the community, and they invited DPD to come and just, sort of be part of it. The commissioner said a few words and talked about some of the grant programs. But before the commissioner and the alderman arrived, it was interesting to hear, Brown Sugar Bakery and Limbs and those folks who are on the corridor talking about, hey, have you applied for SPIF? Have you, applied for this grant? And them sharing knowledge between each other. And we have to create that sort of ecosystem. So I think this sort of, grant may help one small business, but then that starts to trickle into how those businesses growing along the whole corridor.
Totally. OG, what would you say? Impact on your neighborhood?
He basically took my whole answer. But just piggybacking on what he says, I'm looking at the board that's in front of us and behind you all, and each one of those projects is a catalyst for the next project. And when you think about impact, you think about not what the immediate impact of, let's say, our development is, but you think about what's the ripple effect of the impact associated with that project. The community that has a new development now has a resource in the community where other individuals can come to that person to gain knowledge from that individual and use that knowledge to go out and do the next project. So I think that's crucial. In addition to that, when you have new businesses and new activation in corridors, that's a new tax base for that ward as well. And so as you start generating tax bases for that ward, once again, you have a rippling effect. So now streets can be improved, beautification projects can take place, which can activate additional resources in the area.
Cool. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I think that it's great to see these as examples. And I know through my work that people come to me and they see a building and they're like, I want that in my community. And then they come to me at IFF and they say, how did they get that? Like, how did they find the money? What did it take for them to get it? And so I think these are really powerful that we can sometimes overlook how important it is for someone to see something in their community and to be inspired and say, I want that too. I'm also going to say transit as an asset, right? That many people came into this program and were not describing what they're doing as an ETOD project. They were doing community development, and TOD happened to be just they're in a city that happens to be near a train, and they didn't see it as an asset. One of the things that I liked is that I got to talk to them about what does it mean to be transit design? Do you have parking? Do you need parking? How do people come to your spaces? Are you oriented towards the street? What is a barrier to people coming to your space? And starting to engage with them around conversations about how they might think intentionally about their space in relationship to buses and trains, and then start to describe. And so we had people who came into the program and weren't describing themselves as ETOD. And then at the end, they're having these ribbon cuttings and they're like using ETOD language and talking about it. And like, I mean, that's what I was like, you're talking about people saying Smith and stuff like that, like, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome that like, not only are they helping people find the capital, but they're like this identity of who they are and why they're doing it has shaped and shifted over the time.
Can I add one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the communities where you see these projects behind you, the narrative associated with those communities tend to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have these types of projects, when you have this group of development and like-minded individuals coming together, it changes the narrative external from that community. The individual living in that community, despite what's being said about their community, recognizes all of the strengths of the communities. It's now projects like these and impact that's being created through this work is creating a positive narrative to those individuals outside of the community.
Kate, do you have well, I'm not going to say a favorite project, but what's one of the cool ETOD projects from the Elevated Works pipeline you want to
Yeah, I know.
share
That's
more
like,
about?
as a parent, to be like, like, I'm pretty sure that like someone's going to hear and be like, you didn't say me.
I didn't mean to make it so loaded.
Yes.
One of the cool projects you want to share more about.
Yeah, I mean, so Duo Development has been someone who's been with Elevated Chicago for many years and is one of our technical assistance providers. But they were also funded to do the Starling, which is an awesome coffee shop community space in 16th Street. If you haven't been to check it out, they have Monday coffees there and they have community space. You can go in, you can work, you can host community meetings. It's a beautiful space. And they were so intentional about outreach to the community and really building their business model to like understand what people were looking for and to make sure that it was going to be successful. That I think it's a really phenomenal space. I worked for years with a childcare center called Little Angels Learning Center, which is just over the way in Englewood. And they were the one that had the parking that we helped them navigate through something. As an organization, is just like these really charismatic, driven, powerful leaders who do not have time to deal with the real estate and capital, but having a new childcare center that's serving primarily 0 to 3-year-olds in the Englewood community is such a powerful act of real estate and change in that community that it was really exciting to see that. So I have lots of stories that just like come from the heart of people I know, and you like see them go through these journeys, and love being able to talk about it at a place like this.
Amazing. We're going to, I think, do one more question that you all can chime into, and then we'll hand it over for about 10 minutes of audience Q&A. So think about your questions, and then I'll turn it over. You can raise your hand. We'll bring a mic around. So before we wrap up this panel, I'm going to start with Dawveed, but I want to think about what's next. So the question to all of you is, what is needed to support more ETOD, more of these amazing projects, community-driven, community-based? What do you think? Dawveed, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off with, I think, some of the things that are already kind of in the works. We're doing a lot more proactive rezoning of corridors, and we're seeing that, sort of alders all over the city are starting to realize like, hey, sort of how much that zoning change is a big barrier to actually having that development happen in the neighborhood. So, this year, we have about almost 5,000 parcels that are going to be rezoned in the queue or have already been rezoned this year. Some around projects like the 95th Street ETOD corridor plan, which we did with CTA. So just trying to continue to make sure that, that the corridors are ripe for the type of development that community as well as, sort of neighborhoods want to see. And then, sort of continue to just refine and work on how our grants can be more accessible and more connected to the needs of community. Really excited also about the DPD bond funded grants. That's something that is completely new for pre-development funding. That was something that just had never been able to have been done with the funding sources that we had, which were typically corporate funds and TIF. Now with the $1.25 billion housing and economic development bond, we actually were able to set aside some funding so that it wasn't just on the philanthropic sector to maybe provide some capital, or folks like IFF to provide some pre-development capital, that the city could actually support projects that were, good ideas, but needed a little bit more to kind of move them to that shovel readiness or that project readiness to actually apply for a $1 million grant or a $2 million grant, that sort of thing. And then I think just continue to have forums like this, continue to work together, continue to sharpen our swords, because there's always places that we can just continue to improve and make it easier. And just, we were at 10,000 parcels for city-owned land. We're now at about 7,000 parcels. We want to get that to 0 so that our corridors are reactivated. And that's just city-owned land. We got to also get the privately owned vacant land back into productive use as well.
Cool. Either of you, what do you think? What's next? What else is needed to support more ETOD?
Well, like I started with the first question, funding. But of course, funding is necessary, but clarity on what funding is available and how to access that funding. So I think that's crucial. I want the next generation of leaders to step up. So I think strategically thinking about how do we prepare the next generation to not deal with the same hurdles that we dealt with, and create these learning opportunities and these opportunities for the younger generation to come together to learn about these projects. You may have somebody in the room that doesn't even know that they want to be a developer until they're exposed to it. So I think thinking of next steps is bringing that younger generation in early.
Yeah. So we have a big pipeline of projects that Elevated Chicago continues to monitor and support and advocate for. Many of these are projects that received pre-development funding through Elevated Works and are working, towards construction start. And so there's lots of amazing community projects out there that can be supported. One of the things I think is, really thinking about the role of other funders in the ecosystem and how they support, and really being specific about when they need that money, what that money is unlocking, and how people can really be all playing from the same playbook so that we're not having people compete against each other for things. And then I think just partnership, what I love about Elevated Chicago is how it brings together the capital and the building projects with the case studies and the community, the narrative change, and understanding kind of why do this, and just doing this in a way that community is part of that. And so that we're always staying true to what does the community want and how do we make sure that these aren't extractive. And so that's been really powerful for me of IFF being able to do this work with allies who are all thinking about how each of our work is helping move us towards a goal of seeing more community responsiveness.
I gotta say, one of the unintended impacts of being involved in this program is that there's this vacant building, beautiful, across the street from where I live. And every time I walk by it, I can't stop daydreaming about what maybe I could turn it into. So maybe. All right, we're gonna turn it over to audience Q&A. If anyone has a question for our panel, raise your hand. I got you next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sedona, and Hi, everyone. My name's Sedona, and I was just wondering, when you're talking about the importance of policy in driving equitable, transit-oriented development, how do you compare the importance of citywide policy versus aldermanic privilege when lobbying and negotiating?
I'll jump in here. I think this speaks to the role that we do as a system navigator. And so, how people pursue the path forward is really through community. Community is working with their aldermen and understanding kind of how they've listened to their community in order to understand what the community wants for their project and how they can respond to that. So one of our roles is really to help people understand the process to get zoning approvals and to be able to prepare for community meetings. And so one of the resources for technical assistance is that we can help people prepare for those community meetings to have narrative and effective storytelling about why their project is impactful. A lot of people do really excellent work, but don't have the time to have boards and great narrative storytelling and community meetings. And I think it can be really powerful when you go into those community meetings prepared and have done usually some earlier listening with focus groups to understand what the concerns of the community are. And we find that those are often better outcomes for both community and for the organizations who are pursuing the real estate project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the thing I would say is that, depending on where you're at, there's, I think to Kate's point about just sort of the navigator, depending on where you're at, the wards operate differently. Some of them may have a panel of folks that really focus on zoning. Some of them just host community meetings and they say, hey, community, what do you think? So just understanding that part of the process is critical. And then, sort of to Kate's earlier point also about just, resources, folks at the department, like we're always open if you're just like, hey, I have an idea about something. What do you think? To just provide, sort of feedback and context for what's happening in the area. What are some of the ways to move forward? There's all, I think, sorts of resources to kind of parse through that. And then at the larger city scale, we're often working with, sort of nonprofit organizations and community groups and trying to figure out kind of what are those next set of policies that are there to move forward. Like we saw, yesterday where ADUs were able to kind of move forward. So, starting to now process some of those things with parking, with ADUs, with, storefront, those sort of things. We're always there to just provide a resource and to lay out a strategy before you get too far down the line.
It's right up here.
Thank you. My name is Sam Smith. I'm the founder and executive director of the Perry Mansion Cultural Center. It's in Inglewood as well. Questions for all the panel, but specifically for the young man with the Department of Planning. Historically, neighborhoods on the west side and south sides of Chicago have had issues with getting the upfront capital to front the reimbursement grants that the Department of Planning and the city provides. What do you think are the workarounds to get that capital to push projects forward?
Yeah, I think that's the reason literally for this program, 100%, because it is complex and it is difficult, both on, kind of the city side, on the private banking side. There's always just we haven't done a deal in this area. So the terms are usually different. So having that sort of entity, and that's why we're funding, sort of Elevated to do this work, is to be able to provide that sort of support to move forward and provide a roadmap on okay, this is when you should reach out to philanthropic capital. This is a grant that would actually work better in this situation. This is where you actually want to go for the city grant, and this is how you all bring that together to actually deliver the project versus kind of getting stuck in the mud. Because on the city side, we tend to fund our grants, and we are reviewing based off of project readiness and ability to deliver. So sometimes grants are it takes a couple of times, either just because of, readiness. We may have other projects that have moved forward and we only have so much money. So to be able to kind of have that sort of guidance is helpful to bridge that gap, because we know it's an issue all over.
Yeah, I want to call attention. So the ETOD grants, in my experience, is the first time the city did a pre-development grant. So what does this mean? So the organizations got $150,000 that they could spend on pre-development activities to move them towards construction start. So instead of having to use their own cash, or instead of having to go to find a funder to be able to do it. So $150,000 is a lot that can help you get through the design process, do environmental studies, surveys, other things to get you to being able to apply for a grant to be eligible for one of the larger community development grants. There's also other funders. Through our role as a system navigator, we were often introducing people to other funders that were doing similar pre-development grants if that wasn't enough funding, or if they were trying to kind of figure out what their next move was in terms of the funding. So this has been a huge challenge. IFF is a lender. We're frequently running into organizations that are dealing with this. And I think it's very specific to the organization's finances, to the real estate deal, to their timing and need of money. But that's one of our roles in that, is just to get on the phone, meet them in person, go through their financials and really understand it. Because sometimes I would say this is a system challenge, but often has very specific solutions that are tied to the organization of the project.
I think we have time for. All right, we got it.
Hey. They're laughing because I work with all of them. So, hi guys, I'm Hannah Jones. I'm doing a quick plug real quick. So I manage a lot of the grant programs for small businesses that Dawveed is mentioning. Also work with our ETOD grantees. So I think something really interesting about any of the small businesses in the room is that Dawveed mentioned our bond funding. So our bond funding isn't tied to any sort of geographic boundary, unlike our SPIF and NOF programs. So if you are a small business interested in developing a space, we have several tiers of the grant depending on your project size. Please take a look. Our next application is closing February 13th. This is also for OG. Abrams Intergenerational. I do have a favorite project. That is one that I thought was really cool. And I appreciate you all for having an innovative idea that really benefited the neighborhood. And I was like really over the moon to tell people about it. And then Emily, you're just a great moderator. I'm just gonna say that. If you know any of them, they know where to find me.
All right, I think we got time for one more. Thanks, Hannah.
Middle-aged knees coming over.
Hi, my name is Alma Weezer, and thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you to the panel. So just backing off of what this gentleman said in the front about the challenge of these city grants and unlocking funding, the number one obstacle to emerging community developers is access to capital. And we hear this time and time again. And so I've been thinking about this idea, and I'm wondering if in your circles have these conversations been had about how there could be a collaborative funding mechanism to where when you get one grant, then it unlocks all these other opportunities where you're not running and trying to find the next thing and the next thing to close the gap. If there could be some sort of convening between city, state, philanthropic, that we could all sit at a table and say, hey, what can you give? What can you give? How could you come in and how can we work on this together so we can get these projects fully funded right off the bat?
Yeah.
So
I'm right there, +1 on that. I mean, I think that's like the power of the pipeline. So Elevated Chicago's goal with a pipeline of projects is that we can put it in front of a funder with a click of a button, right? Send in an email and have them look at it and have conversations. So I do hear you that a lot of funders have their specific sector, their geography, whatever their target is. And so through the pipeline, we can slice and dice and be like, you want to fund housing? I'll show you 13 housing deals. You want to fund childcares? I'll pull out the 5 childcare deals. You want to fund Englewood? I'm going to pull out the Englewood deals. So we're not there, but I think Elevated Chicago is really working to be like, how can we collect and hold this information in ways that are powerful and changing how capital comes into community?
Yeah, completely. I'll second that on the city side. I mean, it's something that we're, continually, advocating and pushing for, and just, we would love to see that, sort of thing happen. I know, the commissioners had, similar conversations with several philanthropic entities around the city and just trying to, bring it together. It's nothing is there yet, but I think the goal would be to just make it simpler. Like it's very hard to do development in any context, and to really reduce down the number of barriers, just knowing how hard it is and how much we have to do in our neighborhoods is critical.
Okay, sounds like we need to make that happen. All right. Any last? Oh,
Hi,
yep, here we go.
Me, co-chair privilege. At Elevated Chicago, the heart of everything that we do is our E and ETOD. And as I'm looking across at our mentor, our queen, Jackie Grimshaw, who coined the phrase ETOD. We love you. We all sit at your feet and learn. TOD was a concept that was used often. When was the first time you remembered hearing the phrase ETOD?
Well, for me, it was when I was introduced to Abrams Intergenerational Village. It took me about, and it was interesting that you said, how people didn't even talk ETOD, and now towards the end of their project, or they have the funding, now all these new terms are being used. it took me about a month to know what ETOD meant as a part of me learning. But the more that I learned about what ETOD meant outside of just the grant that came with it, initially it was just the grant that we received. It's going into our gap funding. Let's move on to the next one. But the more that I started meeting individuals in this space, talking to individuals about what ETOD means, it's very, very impactful. It's recognizing a resource in the community, the transit, that unlocks resources for those in the community. And so I thought it was, something that was amazing that I was glad to be associated with.
I'll go next. So I've been with IFF since Elevated Chicago started 8 years ago. And so I think that was about when it started. But I remember when I was first introduced to Elevated Chicago, I was, pick up the phone and call Kate if you had a real estate problem. And I was like, well, what makes it a TOD project, right? And what makes it an ETOD project? And so that was a question for me of like, I'm happy to talk to anyone who's trying to do real estate deals in community. These are hard. Sometimes I feel like my job is just to like get people to see that they're not doing it wrong, that they're hard, right? Like a lot of people, you're hitting your head against the wall and you're like, I must be doing this wrong. And I am like not thrilled to say, no, this is what I hear from most people, right? These are hard deals. And so I think what I love about Elevate Chicago is this framing of equitable transit-oriented development. I think is inspirational, right? When you're doing something hard, you need inspiration to keep you going through it. And so for me, when I listen to like why people are doing it, they may not access equitable, they may not access TOD in a description of their project, right? I'm talking to OG about what he's doing. And I'm able to say, you're doing ETOD and it's really cool and you should be proud and excited and you should go around telling people about it and brag about it. And so I think for me, it's just being able to like think about how those words mean something to us and how we use them is really powerful.
Yeah, I think for me, TOD, I practiced architecture and urban planning for about 14 years before coming to the city. So we were doing TOD projects in all over the world, in China and London, and parts of the US. I think ETOD really came to my, sphere when Elevated came up, because I remember the first iteration of what is now the Connected Communities Ordinance, passed. And it was like, okay, great. We have, sort of opportunity for more density around transit. And then when that map of that, I think 95% or so of those developments happened on the north side, and on the south side around the red line, around the green line, or on the west side around the green line and the pink line, none of that had happened. Really was like, okay, we got to really think differently about how those developments happen in our neighborhoods and in places that do have transit access, and how do we maximize that? So definitely Elevate has been a phenomenal platform to just engage in a larger conversation with a lot of different, sort of experts around how to make that happen.
If you want to learn more about Elevated Works, you can find info at cnt.org or at elevatedchicago.org. Please join me in thanking just 3 of the coolest people I know.
Thank you again to OG, Dawveed, Kate, and Emily. We have some wonderful thank you gifts that also represent some of our lenses in Elevated Chicago, which is our art lens. So designed by local artists, some takeaway gifts, some swag. Swag is always important. Thank you again. And we still have 2 more panels coming up. So you guys use the indoor potties first, the porta potties second, but come on back.